Paris, 1942. The City of Light has gone dark. Nazi flags hang from the Eiffel Tower. Gestapo officers patrol the streets. And somewhere in the shadows, a woman with a wooden leg is making them very, very nervous. Her name is Virginia Hall. To the French resistance, she's a hero. To the British Secret Service, she's indispensable. But to the Nazis, she's the most dangerous Allied spy in all of France. The Gestapo has given her a code name, the Limping Lady. They've plastered wanted posters with her description across occupied territory. They've assigned their most ruthless officers to hunt her down. There's just one problem. They can't catch her. This is the true story of the woman who became Hitler's most wanted spy. A woman who was rejected by her own government because of her disability, but went on to become one of the most effective intelligence operatives in World War II. A woman who coordinated resistance networks, organized sabotage operations, and helped dozens of Allied soldiers escape from behind enemy lines. Her story was classified for decades. When it finally came to light, it revealed one of the most remarkable tales of courage, ingenuity, and pure determination in the history of espionage. This is the story of Virginia Hall, the spy who limped to victory.
Before Virginia Hall became a spy, she was just an ambitious young woman with big dreams and an adventurous spirit. Born in Baltimore, Maryland in 1906, Virginia grew up in a privileged household. Her father was a successful banker, and her mother came from a prominent family. But Virginia was never content to simply follow the expected path of a wealthy young woman in the 1920s. While her peers attended tea parties and planned society weddings, Virginia learned languages: French, German, Italian, Russian. She devoured them all with an insatiable appetite for knowledge. She attended prestigious schools: Roland Park Country School, Radcliffe College, Barnard College. But classroom learning wasn't enough. She wanted to see the world. In the late 1920s, she packed her bags and headed to Europe, studying in Paris, Vienna, and Strasbourg. She was preparing herself for a career in the U.S. Foreign Service. She wanted to be a diplomat, to represent her country on the world stage. Everything was going according to plan, until December 8, 1933. Virginia was on a hunting trip in Turkey. It was a crisp winter morning, the kind of day when your breath forms clouds in the cold air. She was climbing over a fence, her shotgun in hand. What happened next would change her life forever. The gun discharged. The blast tore through her left foot. In 1933, in rural Turkey, this wasn't just a serious injury. It was a potential death sentence. Gangrene set in quickly. The infection spread. Doctors had only one option: amputation. They cut her leg off below the knee. Virginia named her prosthetic leg Cuthbert. It was made of wood, heavy and uncomfortable, prone to causing blisters and sores. Walking any significant distance was painful. Running was nearly impossible. And her dreams of joining the Foreign Service? They seemed to have died on that Turkish hillside. In 1933, the U.S. State Department had regulations, clear, unambiguous regulations. No one with an amputation could serve in the Foreign Service. It didn't matter that Virginia spoke 5 languages fluently. It didn't matter that she had studied at the world's finest institutions. It didn't matter that she was brilliant, capable, and more determined than anyone they'd ever met. She had a disability. Case closed. Virginia appealed the decision. She argued. She pleaded her case. She demonstrated that she could do everything required of a Foreign Service officer. But the bureaucrats wouldn't budge. The rules were the rules. So Virginia Hall did what she would do again and again throughout her life. She refused to accept defeat. If America didn't want her, maybe someone else would.
When World War II broke out in 1939, Virginia Hall was in Paris, working at the U.S. Embassy as a consular clerk. It wasn't the diplomatic position she dreamed of, but it was a foot in the door. Or, as Virginia might have darkly joked, a prosthetic foot in the door. But as Nazi Germany swept across Europe in the spring of 1940, that door was about to slam shut. The Germans were coming. In May 1940, Hitler's forces invaded France. The Wehrmacht moved with terrifying speed, overwhelming French defenses. By June, Paris had fallen. The French government collapsed. The Nazis occupied the northern part of France, while a collaborationist regime was set up in the south, based in the town of Vichy. Virginia, along with the rest of the embassy staff, evacuated to London. She watched from across the channel as her beloved France fell under the Nazi boot. And she decided she was going to do something about it. America wasn't officially in the war yet. Pearl Harbor was still more than a year away. But Britain was fighting alone, desperately holding out against Hitler's war machine. And the British were willing to take risks that the Americans weren't. Virginia approached the British Special Operations Executive, known as the SOE. This was Churchill's new organization, created to set Europe ablaze through sabotage, subversion, and guerrilla warfare behind enemy lines. They were recruiting agents to parachute into occupied territory, to organize resistance networks, to make life hell for the Nazis. The SOE officers looked at Virginia Hall's application. American? Check. Fluent in French? Check. Familiar with France? Check. Missing part of her left leg? Pause. They discussed it, they debated it. A spy with a prosthetic leg? How would she run if she needed to escape? How would she hike across mountains? How would she blend in? But Virginia was insistent. She could do this. She could do everything they needed and more. She demonstrated her abilities. She showed them that her disability hadn't slowed her down. She argued passionately for the opportunity. Finally, they relented. Virginia Hall became one of the first women recruited into the SOE's Special Operations Branch. But there was a catch. They wouldn't parachute her in, too risky with her leg. Instead, she'd have to infiltrate France by more conventional means. Virginia didn't care. She was going back to France. In August 1941, she crossed into Vichy, France, posing as an American journalist, carrying credentials from the New York Post. Her cover story, she was reporting on social conditions in unoccupied France. Her real mission? To establish intelligence networks, coordinate resistance activities, and prepare the ground for eventual Allied liberation. She settled in Lyon, a major city in Vichy, France that was becoming a hub of resistance activity. And there, Virginia Hall went to work. She recruited agents, she established safe houses, she organized escape routes for Allied soldiers trapped behind enemy lines. She coordinated the delivery of weapons and supplies. She transmitted intelligence back to London using a wireless radio, broadcasting at great personal risk because the Germans had radio detection vans constantly sweeping for signals. The French resistance fighters gave her a code name Germaine. The British called her Marie. But to the dozens of Allied airmen and escaped prisoners of war she helped flee to Spain, she was simply the lady. She was everywhere and nowhere, meeting contacts in cafes, dead-dropping intelligence in parks, coordinating sabotage operations against Nazi infrastructure, all while limping through Lyon on her wooden leg, pretending to be nothing more than an American journalist. The Nazis knew someone was operating in Lyon, someone brilliant, someone effective, someone who was causing serious problems for the occupation. They started investigating, they started asking questions, and they started putting together pieces of a puzzle. An American woman, a limp, operating in Lyon. By late 1942, the Gestapo had figured it out. They created wanted posters describing the limping lady.
They assigned Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Lyon, one of their most ruthless officers, to track her down. The reward for her capture was enormous. Virginia Hall had become the most wanted Allied spy in France, and the net was closing in.
Life as a spy in occupied France was a constant tightrope walk between success and capture, between life and death. Virginia Hall's daily routine would have terrified most people. Every morning, she left her apartment wondering if it would be her last day of freedom. Every person she passed could be an informer. Every knock on the door could be the Gestapo. Every transmission on her wireless radio could be the one that the detection vans finally triangulated. But Virginia thrived in this environment. Her disability, the very thing that had barred her from diplomatic service, actually became an asset. The Nazis were looking for a spy, someone slick and athletic, someone who could run and fight. They weren't looking for a middle-aged American woman with a prosthetic leg. The limp that made her so distinctive also made her seem less threatening, less suspicious. Her network grew rapidly. She recruited operatives across central France. She established communication lines between resistance groups. She coordinated the reception of supplies dropped by the RAF in nighttime parachute operations. Weapons, explosives, radio equipment, money, all flowing through Virginia's networks to resistance fighters. She also ran one of the most successful escape lines in France. Allied airmen shot down over French territory would be hidden by the resistance and funneled to Virginia's network. She provided them with false papers, civilian clothes, money, and guides. She moved them south toward the Pyrenees Mountains and the border with neutral Spain. Dozens of Allied servicemen owed their freedom, maybe their lives, to Virginia Hall. But the work came at a cost. The blisters on her stump from the prosthetic leg became infected. Walking long distances was agony. She'd return to her apartment at night, remove Cuthbert, and find blood soaking through her clothes. But she'd bandage the wounds, get a few hours of sleep, strap Cuthbert back on, and head out the next morning. The intelligence she gathered was invaluable. German troop movements, locations of ammunition dumps, details of fortifications, the schedule of train shipments, all of it radioed back to London in coded messages, helping the Allies plan their strategy. She also coordinated sabotage operations. Resistance fighters under her direction blew up bridges, derailed trains, cut telephone lines, and destroyed factories producing materials for the German war machine. The Nazis were hemorrhaging resources in France, and Virginia Hall was one of the reasons why. But her success made her a target. By November 1942, the situation had become critical. The Germans had invaded Vichy France, eliminating the distinction between occupied and unoccupied zones. The entire country was now under direct Nazi control. Virginia's protective cover as an American journalist in neutral Vichy France evaporated overnight. The Gestapo intensified their search. Klaus Barbie, who would later be tried for crimes against humanity, was personally leading the hunt for the limping lady. Informants were everywhere. The reward for her capture kept increasing. Virginia's contacts in Lyon police warned her they were coming. They knew who she was. They knew where she lived. It was time to run. But how do you escape from occupied France when you're the most wanted spy in the country? The coast was heavily guarded. The airports were locked down. The main roads had checkpoints everywhere. Virginia had one option: the mountains. In the middle of winter, with a wooden leg.
The Pyrenees Mountains in winter are brutal. Snow-covered peaks reaching over 11,000 feet. Temperatures well below freezing. Avalanches, blizzards, and winds that can literally knock you off your feet. Experienced mountaineers, with proper equipment and 2 good legs, consider these mountains dangerous in winter. Virginia Hall was about to cross them with a wooden leg in November 1942, with the Gestapo on her trail. Her guide was a Basque shepherd who knew the mountain passes. He made it clear this journey was going to be hell.
They'd be hiking for days through snow and ice. They'd have to avoid German patrols that watched the main passes. They'd be carrying all their supplies on their backs, and if a blizzard hit, they could easily freeze to death. Virginia said she was ready. What choice did she have? Stay and be captured, tortured, and executed by the Nazis, or take her chances in the mountains? They set out at night. Virginia, the shepherd, and a small group of other escapees, including some of the Allied airmen she'd helped rescue. The first few miles were relatively flat, moving through the foothills. Virginia's leg ached, but she could manage. Then they started climbing. Each step was agony. The prosthetic leg wasn't designed for mountaineering. It slipped on ice. It got caught in snowdrifts. The straps rubbed her stump raw, opening wounds that bled and then froze. Virginia wrapped her stump in extra cloth, trying to cushion the prosthetic, but it didn't help much. The group climbed higher. The air grew thinner, the cold more intense. Virginia's breath came in gasps. Her companions offered to help her, to carry her supplies, but she refused. She would make it on her own. They hiked for 3 days. 3 days of climbing through snow and ice. 3 days of barely any sleep, huddling together for warmth during brief rests. 3 days of constant pain as Cuthbert tore her leg apart with every step. At one point, Virginia radioed back to London. She wanted them to know the situation. She sent a brief message. "Cuthbert is being tiresome, but I can cope." The SOE officer in London, who didn't know that Cuthbert was her prosthetic leg, radioed back asking if they should send someone to help deal with whoever Cuthbert was. Virginia, despite her exhaustion and pain, must have smiled at that. "No," she replied. She could handle Cuthbert herself. On the 3rd day, they reached the highest pass, the border with Spain. Freedom was on the other side. But so was one final brutal descent through deep snow. Virginia's leg was a bloody mess by now. Each step sent jolts of pain through her body. But she was so close. The Nazis were behind her. Spain and safety lay ahead. She took one step, then another, then another. Her companions watched in awe as this woman, this indomitable woman, limped her way down the mountain. They would later tell stories about Virginia Hall's crossing of the Pyrenees, about her courage and determination, about how she never complained, never gave up, even when she had every reason to. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they crossed the border. They were in Spain. Virginia Hall had escaped. She was arrested immediately by Spanish authorities. Spain was officially neutral, but Franco's government was sympathetic to the Nazis. Escapees from France were routinely thrown into Spanish prisons. Virginia spent 6 weeks in a Barcelona prison. The conditions were grim, but compared to what the Gestapo would have done to her, it was paradise. The British government eventually negotiated her release. By January 1943, Virginia Hall was in London, receiving a hero's welcome from the SOE. She'd expected to rest, to recover, to maybe take a desk job coordinating operations. She'd done her part, surely. She'd risked everything, survived against impossible odds. No one would blame her for stepping back from field work. But Virginia Hall wasn't done fighting, not even close. She approached the American Office of Strategic Services, the OSS. This was America's new intelligence organization, the predecessor to the CIA. The OSS was recruiting operatives for dangerous missions behind enemy lines. Virginia wanted back in. The OSS officers were skeptical. They'd heard about her exploits in France, but they also knew the Gestapo had her description. Every Nazi in France would be looking for the limping lady. How could she possibly operate undercover again? Virginia had an idea. She would disguise herself. Not with wigs or makeup, but something more fundamental. She would change her entire appearance, her posture, her gait. She would become someone completely different. In the spring of 1944, as the Allies prepared for D-Day, Virginia Hall prepared to return to France. This time, she wouldn't be a sophisticated American journalist. She would be an elderly French peasant woman named Marcelle Montaigne. Gray hair, dowdy clothing, a shuffling walk that disguised her limp. Just another old woman in rural France, beneath the notice of the occupying forces. The OSS approved her mission. In March 1944, a British boat dropped her on a beach in Brittany. Virginia Hall was back in France, and she was ready to raise hell. The Virginia Hall who returned to France in 1944 was virtually unrecognizable from the woman who'd left in 1942. Gone was the stylish journalist with her fashionable clothes and confident stride. In her place was Marcelle, a shuffling, elderly peasant woman with gray hair, worn clothing, and the weathered face of someone who'd spent a lifetime working in the fields. Virginia had even learned to walk differently, masking the distinct limp that had made her famous. She moved slowly, with the careful steps of someone whose body had been worn down by age and hard labor. The disguise was brilliant. Nazi soldiers looked right past her. To them, she was just another irrelevant old Frenchwoman, part of the rural landscape, beneath notice. They had no idea that this peasant woman was coordinating one of the most effective resistance networks in central France. Virginia established her base in the remote countryside of central France, in the departments of Nièvre and Haute-Loire. This was rugged, rural territory, perfect for guerrilla operations. She moved from farm to farm, barn to barn, never staying in one place too long. She had a new mission: to prepare for D-Day and the liberation of France. The Allies were coming, but they needed intelligence and sabotage to pave the way. Virginia's job was to organize resistance fighters into an effective force, to identify targets for sabotage, and to create chaos behind German lines that would prevent reinforcements from reaching the Normandy beaches. She coordinated the Maquis, the rural resistance fighters who lived in the forests and mountains. These were farmers, tradesmen, and former soldiers who'd refused to accept Nazi occupation. She trained them in guerrilla tactics, weapons handling, and demolitions. She coordinated the delivery of supplies from Allied parachute drops. She established communication networks that allowed different resistance groups to coordinate their actions. As D-Day approached, Virginia's network went into high gear. On June 6, 1944, as Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, Virginia Hall's teams struck throughout central France. They blew up bridges, cutting off German retreat and reinforcement routes. They destroyed railway lines, preventing the Wehrmacht from moving tanks and troops north. They cut telephone and telegraph wires, disrupting German communications. They ambushed convoys, tying down German units that were desperately needed in Normandy. They attacked fuel depots, ammunition stores, and supply centers.
The Germans were reeling. They couldn't understand how this rural backwater had suddenly erupted into such well-coordinated resistance. They had no idea that the operations were being coordinated by an American woman with a wooden leg, disguised as an elderly peasant. Virginia's intelligence reports to the OSS were invaluable. Detailed information on German troop strengths, movements, and defensive positions, locations of headquarters and supply depots, the morale of German units, all radioed back to London and Washington, helping Allied commanders plan their strategy. But the work remained incredibly dangerous. The Germans were conducting savage reprisals against the resistance. Entire villages were massacred. Captured resistance fighters were tortured and executed. The Nazis knew they were losing control of the countryside, and they responded with brutal force. Virginia continued to move, never staying in one place long enough to be caught. She lived rough, sleeping in barns and forest camps. Her leg suffered terribly. The blisters and infections never fully healed. Walking long distances remained agonizing, but she kept going. As the summer progressed, Allied forces broke out from Normandy and began racing across France. The Germans were in full retreat.
Virginia's network shifted focus, now working to prevent the Germans from destroying infrastructure as they fell back, and helping Allied forces advance by providing reconnaissance and guidance. By September 1944, France was liberated. The nightmare was over. Nazi flags came down. French flags went up. Cities and towns erupted in celebration. Virginia Hall had spent nearly 3 years fighting the Nazis in occupied France. She'd organized networks, coordinated sabotage, rescued Allied soldiers, and fought in the shadows against one of history's most evil regimes. She'd done all of this despite her disability, despite being rejected by her own country's foreign service, despite being the most wanted Allied spy in France. The French awarded her the Croix de Guerre. The British made her an honorary member of the Order of the British Empire. And the Americans? President Harry Truman personally awarded her the Distinguished Service Cross, the only civilian woman to receive this honor during World War II. But Virginia didn't attend a public ceremony. She remained in the shadows. Her work was still classified. Even in peacetime, she had secrets to keep. The war in Europe ended in May 1945. Most people would have considered this the end of their intelligence career. Time to retire, to rest, to finally live a normal life. Virginia Hall had other ideas.
When World War II ended, the Office of Strategic Services was disbanded. Its agents scattered, many returning to civilian life. Their wartime exploits destined to become stories told over drinks, if they could talk about them at all. But in 1947, something new emerged from the ashes of the OSS, the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. And they wanted experienced operatives who knew the game, people who'd proven themselves in the field, people who understood intelligence work from the ground up. Virginia Hall was one of the first people recruited. She spent the next 14 years working for the CIA. Most of her work remains classified to this day. We know she worked on operations related to the Cold War. We know she was involved in planning and analysis. We know she trained new operatives, passing on the hard-won lessons she'd learned in occupied France. But unlike her male colleagues, Virginia never rose to senior leadership positions. She never became a station chief or a division head. Despite her legendary war record, despite her proven abilities, she remained in the middle ranks of the organization. Some historians suggest that the glass ceiling for women in the CIA during the 1950s and 60s was particularly thick. Virginia didn't complain publicly. She did her job with the same determination she'd shown throughout her life. But one has to wonder what she thought, working in an organization she'd helped inspire, watching less experienced men get promoted past her. She retired from the CIA in 1966, at the age of 60. She settled in Maryland with her husband, Paul Guyot, a former OSS colleague she'd married in 1957. They lived quietly, gardening, reading, living the peaceful civilian life that Virginia had never really experienced. She rarely spoke about her war experiences. Even her own family didn't know the full extent of what she'd done. It was only after her death in 1982, at age 76, that the full story began to emerge. The documents were gradually declassified. Books were written. Historians began to piece together the incredible life of Virginia Hall. Today, Virginia Hall is recognized as one of the greatest spies in history. The CIA's training headquarters features her prominently. Books, documentaries, and even a potential Hollywood film have told her story. In 2016, the CIA named one of their buildings after her. In 2021, a U.S. Navy ship was christened in her honor. But perhaps the greatest testament to Virginia Hall's legacy isn't the awards or the recognition. It's the inspiration she provides. Her story proves that disability doesn't define capability, that rejection isn't permanent, that one person with courage and determination really can make a difference in the world. She was told she couldn't serve in the Foreign Service because of her prosthetic leg, so she became one of the most effective spies in World War II instead. She was hunted by the Gestapo as the most dangerous Allied agent in France. And she evaded them, even walking across the Pyrenees Mountains in winter with a wooden leg. They never caught her, because Virginia Hall was always so much more than her disability. She was brilliant, brave, resourceful, and absolutely relentless. She was a hero in the truest sense of the word. And she remained a mystery to the very end. Even those who knew her best said that Virginia never fully revealed herself. She kept secrets, even from those closest to her. Some part of her always remained in the shadows, observing, analyzing, keeping her own counsel. Maybe that's appropriate. Spies deal in secrets, and Virginia Hall was one of the best spies who ever lived. Her legacy lives on, not just in history books, but in everyone who refuses to let obstacles define their destiny. Everyone who's been told they can't do something because of who they are. Everyone who's been rejected by institutions that should have recognized their value. Virginia Hall's message is simple. Prove them wrong. The woman the Nazis feared most? The spy who limped to victory? The legend who nearly disappeared into history. Virginia Hall. Remember her name.